Most founders think that the hard part is building the product. Hard part is often proving the problem is real, earning trust in skeptical market, and staying focused when investors, experts, and incumbents all have opinions that include what can't be done.
As a mother, I feel the pain of having to drag my kids to the physician's office. It is time consuming. It is hard to get an appointment.
She wasn't coming into this with all the baggage that healthcare professionals carry with them. It was very much what you see drive the most successful companies.
In this episode of LifeSci Continuum, I sit down with Nathalya Mamane and Dr. Mina, the co-founders of Anywhere DX, a company working to make high-quality diagnostics affordable, accessible, and usable wherever people are. Nathalya brings more than 20 years of experience building and scaling businesses, along with the kind of founder passion you just don't see every day. The path into diagnostics didn't start with a lab breakthrough. It started as a parent dealing with the very real pain of trying to get a sick child tested, treated, and back to the world without blowing up her entire day.
As a parent, I felt that there was this unmet need and this gap in the market for tools that would make my life as a parent simpler.
Michael brings the other side of the equation: deep scientific, clinical, and public health expertise. He's a globally recognized immunologist and epidemiologist, formerly of Harvard, Brigham and Women's Hospital and the Broad Institute. He became one of the leading voices of testing strategy during the COVID-19 pandemic.
How we allow somebody to be able to read out a molecular diagnostic tool just on their own with their own two eyes. That usually requires like an instrument and a camera that reads photons and all this stuff, and we don't actually need that. We just need the eyeballs.
Nathalya and Michael pull back the curtain on what it really takes to build in healthcare.
We want these to be in the nurse's office of every single school system in the country, if not in the world. And so having a teacher say that and validating what we always envisioned is really great for us.
We get into founder passion, market friction, public health, regulatory realities, and why the best companies often start with a painfully simple problem, not a complicated technology looking for a market. Full disclosure, Anywhere DX is a client of mine. All right, let's go. All right, well, Michael and Nathalya, thanks for joining me today. Getting right into it, Nathalya, why don't you do a quick introduction to Anywhere DX? What is it? Why have you put it together?
So Anywhere DX is building, very simply, a diagnostic solution for at-home testing. And that is in plain terms. As a mother, I feel the pain of having to drag my kids to the physician's office when they are sick, something that is, according to me, completely unnecessary. They use very simple things. It is time consuming. It is hard to get an appointment. And as a parent, I felt that there was this unmet need and this gap in the market for tools that would make my life as a parent simpler. And so we decided to build this product with very strong pillars that would allow for just a more streamlined process to get our kids tested and treated when we need it. And the first disease or the first indication that we are going for is for strep throat, because it is way time for us to be able to have an at-home strep test whenever we need it, anywhere we need it.
Michael, from your perspective, what is really interesting about Anywhere DX for you?
The most interesting aspect and the reason we really wanted to start Anywhere DX is that we've not created a system in healthcare that is accessible to the average consumer and the average parent, individual who needs healthcare when they need it. We still live in a system that was built over the last century, and it evolved organically, and every now and again there really needs to be a step change in how the healthcare system works. I'm not somebody who's ever wanted to sit idly by and say, well, this is how things are done, so we'll just make incremental changes. And I think that this approach that Nathalya and I are taking with Anywhere DX is really, it's a step change that we feel really needs to be made in the healthcare industry to push it along, to make a declarative statement that the average individual shouldn't be beholden to these very rigid structures that are generally holding healthcare back, but should have accessible healthcare on their terms in a way that really fits the modern person, the modern family.
Nathalya, can you recount for us the impetus? How did you come up with the idea, or what drove you to start this business? What was kind of the initiator for you?
The initiator for me was just pain for me as a parent. I just felt that I just couldn't take it anymore. Like I remember during COVID when all the doctors were closed and I had to fight my way to urgent cares and my daughter was sick and we knew it was in COVID, but we didn't know what it was. And they would come in completely like hazmated and they went to my car door and they would like swab her throat through the car window. And I'm like, this does not make any sense. Like we have not evolved. We literally have not evolved in the past. I mean, Michael, what would you say? Like 50, 60 years? Like I remember when somebody told me about the fact that they went from a throat culture to rapid antigen test way back when. It was, I don't know, 60 years ago or 50 years ago. And then the big innovation was instead of doing 2 swabs, one after the other, and swabbing the kid twice, they would just put 2 swabs at a time in somebody's throat. And so that was a big innovation that is so old, it just doesn't make sense anymore. And so when this happened to me during the pandemic, I just went on this rampage and figured like, we got to do something. Someone's gonna have to do something about it. And it was so happened that I was in the process of doing my MBA and I just kind of like decided to kind of run with it through my MBA journey and here we are. So I don't come from a scientific background at all. I mean, I'm learning things as I go and I just took this as this sort of like mission that something needs to be changed. I don't know. I think I was crazy at the time.
I think we all feel like that at some level when we're getting things going. Michael, how did you get connected with Nathalya?
It was actually that process of her tracking me down in the middle of the pandemic. I was, at the time, I was advising the White House, governors across the country, Congress, Senate, international governments around the COVID-19 response, working with companies like Abbott and Becton Dickinson and Quidel and all sorts of testing companies to support them in various ways, was running the U.S. home test to treat program. And I'm pretty sure I probably got a couple of emails from Nathalya that probably went into my trash can or something in my email. But I can't recall the exact moment. She might, but somehow she did pique my interest at some point. And what? The moment I met her, it was very clear that this was a woman who, to hell or high water, was going to build a successful company, and that drove me to want to get to know Nathalya. And she was very passionate about bringing home diagnostics for strep throat into the home, in a fashion that made sense to me. It was everything that I was standing for in a very public fashion. Everything that I was advising about was around access. The U.S. program that I was running for the Biden administration was specifically towards enabling access to care and treatment through enabling access to home diagnostics and linking those to telehealth, which is exactly what Nathalya wanted to do and exactly what we're doing. And so we really started talking at that point, and then over the years decided to build a company around this idea that she was so passionate about and I was so passionate about. She brings expertise that I don't have, and I bring expertise that she doesn't. So we made a great duo to get this thing started.
Nathalya, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I remember how I met her. It was during the pandemic and he was on a webinar. And at the time, I would just not go to any of the webinars. I was like, enough with the Zoom. If it's not in person, I'm not attending. And for some reason, this one I attended and Michael came on and he started talking. And I'm like, I'm going to meet this guy and I'm going to talk to him. And so I found out he was going to be at this conference. I don't remember which conference, in Texas. And I went all the way to Texas and I finagled my way to a meeting with him, and he had no idea who I was because, yes, he did not receive any of my emails. And then we spoke, and then he was coming through Boston, and I said, I'm not going to leave him alone until we meet one-on-one. And we did. And I basically said, look, I need you on my team, and I can't afford you. you got to come and help me, and you got to help me do this. And he said yes.
Michael, what do you think it was that convinced you to say yes? I mean, I imagine in your position, you must not get emails from a lot of people, and they want your time and attention, and they want you to participate, and you just can't, be involved in everything. So what was it about this that made you say yes?
Yeah, I think there were a couple things. One, I love that Nathalya doesn't come from diagnostics. She wasn't coming into this with all the baggage that healthcare professionals carry with them, that diagnostic companies carry with them. It was very much in the vein of what you see drives the most successful companies. Somebody naive coming into a new space with a certain skill set who says, I don't care about those rules that exist. We're going to make our own rules. We're going to plow our own pathway. And that was, at the time, that resonated, and to this day, to be clear, resonated very, very strongly with me. I've never been one to sit by and follow the rules that are kind of laid out in society about how things are. I like to build the new rules about how we think that they should be and envision the future. And I think Nathalya shared that same passion. She didn't share it. She exuded that same passion, and to build and create a new healthcare system and a new ecosystem, starting with something really simple. And that was where I think for me, I was at the time watching a lot of companies try to build the next super sexy thing that was going to be too expensive for consumers to buy and out of reach at the end of the day, despite all the best aspirations in the world going into it. And Nathalya came into this with a very different position. She said she wasn't coming in from a tech-heavy position or anything like that. She was just saying people need to be able to test their kids and themselves for strep throat. And she had a very clear vision of what that looked like. It was not sexy. It was very straightforward, affordable, and something that the average person could actually buy on a whim when they need it, online or at a CVS or Walgreens. And that was exactly what the world was needing at the time for tackling the pandemic. It's what I've stood for in all sorts of ecosystems and public health efforts that I've been involved with or have led over the years. And it was very refreshing to see somebody taking a different approach and not trying to win a Nobel Prize with this, but trying to say, this is going to change healthcare and it's going to be accessible. And the reason is that it's going to be simple. That has so many advantages. It has an advantage of enabling easier clearance through the FDA and faster clearance. It enables us to build it on more of a shoestring budget. And it's just the right type of product for people to be able to have access to. So all of it made sense. And she came into it from a very business mindset first, not wedded to any particular technology.
I think you're making a great point. And this is something that I see some of my clients struggle with, in that they have this brilliant idea, but often it's over engineered. It's overly reliant on a specific technology or frame of mind. And it is refreshing to have somebody come in with fresh eyes and start with solving a real problem, as opposed to, I made a thing, now let me go find a market for it.
That's right.
And I like that approach. Nathalya, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I'm so honored by everything that Michael's saying, but there's so much mutual respect between him and I. That's why we make such a great team. I struggled a lot with being taken seriously because I didn't come in with the scientific background, and I didn't come in with a startup background either. Like, I hadn't started a company before and exited one. So for a very long time, I was sort of seen as oh, this is a pet project for this mom, right? I was just a mom starting this thing and it's never going to take off. And I really struggled with that. So for a long time, I had to kind of I couldn't say I had this idea because I am a mom, because then it would sort of blur things into are you just a mom, or what is it? What are you exactly? But I did come at this with a very clear vision. And whether some people took it seriously or not, it didn't matter to me. In fact, I'm one to never really care what people think. So I just came at this with this is
as a person, as a consumer, whether I'm a mom or a sick person, this is what I would want for me. And I know that if I want this for me, I would want this. A lot of people would want the same thing. And I had to come at this with a lot of market research, and I had to talk to a lot of people because I needed somehow to get credibility into what I was saying. And that was very hard. It was very hard. So the fact that I was able to kind of get Michael's attention and have him listen and say, look, I can buy into this idea. And then, it took time. Like, he bought into it, and then we kind of talked a lot, and you advised me a lot, and then we became co-founders. I had to build myself up as an entrepreneur because that's not what I was before. So it definitely was part of the journey. It's definitely part of the growing up part of taking this role. It just wasn't that easy.
I want to come back to that in a minute. The types of conversations and the value, that having Michael on board brings. What I'd like to understand, though, is what was your earliest vision of what the product would be, and how has your journey changed that over time, if at all?
So that's the one thing that has not changed ever since day one. So when I came up with this idea, and I have to admit this, I came up with this idea during my MBA. I moonshot it. I was like, I didn't know anything about anything, but I was like, if I had the ideal solution for an at-home strep test, it would have to be on the shelves at the pharmacy, so not just online. And that has to have a certain price range, price point. What is that price point? I just guesstimated an average price of a copay, which could vary between, copay is between $0 and $50, $75. So somewhere in there. Market research told me, and Michael validated, that the price point needs to be under 25. For that to happen, we need to create something that is really inexpensive to create, right? To manufacture. Under $5, which is, it's very hard. Like, it's not that easy to make, right? So that was one. It had to be on the shelves. That means it had to be inexpensive and accessible. The other thing is it needed to be super simple to use. I wanted something that worked like a pregnancy test, where if you can pee on a stick and get your result, technically you can spit into something and get a result. Okay, it's not that simple, but that's how simple I wanted this to look like from the very beginning. So I wanted to use saliva because I wouldn't want to swab my kids. Who would want to swab their kids? So no swabs. Has to be saliva. I had no idea if those things were even possible because, again, I had no background. But I was like, I want saliva. I want cheap. I want like a pregnancy test. I want a simple readout. So everybody understands a 1-line, 2-line result. I figured that was probably the least expensive, least technical, thing to develop. And so I had these crazy ideas, but I had these, right, Michael? It's exactly what we're building. We're building this saliva-based test that is going to be under $5 to manufacture, so it could sell at retail for $20 or $25, and it has a very simple readout. So here you go.
So you started with basically the requirements and the restrictions, and your arrow shot is to get to the product. You didn't start with a very concrete, physical idea for the product. It was really more around what it had to do and what it couldn't.
Right. The one thing that, and Michael and I totally agree on this, is the one thing we didn't want like a device. We didn't want to be associated to a device. So whether it's plugged into a wall with a cord, or whether it needs an instrument for it to heat it or to read it, and it needed to work completely, like it had to be self-contained. I mean, at some point we threw around, using your phone and plugging something into the phone and then having the readout out there. Like, I was like, these things change everything. We want to be completely fully integrated, so it doesn't depend on any other instrument. Will that be exactly what we end up with as a first product to get to market? Maybe, maybe not. But that is really where we're going. We want to get something. And again, I talk about the pregnancy test a lot because, the pregnancy test kind of evolved over
my lifetime, right? When my mom first got pregnant with my brother, she went to the doctor. When she got pregnant with my sister, she went to the pharmacy to get tested. And then when she got pregnant with my baby sister, she did it on her own. Like in the span of what the difference is, 18 years, everything changed for my mom, right? And today, who goes to the doctor to get tested and pee in a cup or to the pharmacy? Like we're just buying these pregnancy tests by the case. So like that's what I envisioned. Like the world that I'm dreaming is that we don't need to, we can just get these by the case as we need them.
So thinking about that, the vision for the end product has kind of, it's come into focus. Along your journey, have you received any pushback from anybody, whether it's been a partner or, maybe there's a representative group or a manufacturer or, really anyone? Have you gotten pushback on this?
You want to start, Michael?
Yeah, I would say I don't know that we don't get pushback on the idea that the average person should have a home strep test available to them. I think that's broadly agreed upon. Mm-hmm. The big pushback, though, does come in with people saying, well, we have urgent care, so is it that important? Like, the reality is yes. It's just like a lack of foresight to say, well, of course, once this is out there, nobody's going to be saying, hey, urgent care was good enough. Mm-hmm. The biggest pushback I would say we get is probably the market and investors trying to understand whether they want to invest in early stage companies. It's not really pushback. It's more just, this is early stage technology. Are you really going to get through the FDA? Is the FDA really going to be okay with this for a home test? We know, because we've spoken to the agency, that yes, they are supportive. And in fact, they've been pretty emphatic about trying to improve home tools. And that's a big departure from when I was yelling about it to the FDA in 2020, that people needed home tools for COVID and then for flu. And now they've actually quite embraced the idea. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think I think this is actually generally accepted. Like, wow, great idea. A question that comes up is like, well, what's wrong with what we got? Why not just bring the tests that are done at a doctor's office into the home? The reality is that those require throat swabs, and they're not particularly sensitive. And so there are regulatory roadblocks to that. And so that's actually part of how Nathalya went about first envisioning this product. Was it has to be simple, it has to be something people will use, and it can't be a throat swab. We know that the agency doesn't want a throat swab. They want saliva or something really simple. So we're going after a saliva collection process to measure strep throat. And that, of course, that's the answer to sort of any of the pushback we do get. Like, why not just use what's out there? Well, because what's out there it's not really appropriate for the average home and the average user who is completely uneducated about diagnostics. And it's not particularly sensitive. And so we're making a highly sensitive device that is extremely easy to use and affordable.
So I've received a lot of pushback. Prior to getting Michael, I've had everything from in certain terms, push aside, like move aside, you don't know what you're doing, to what are you doing? Are you a doctor? Like, what are you doing? Do you know what you're doing? To you will never get funded because you don't have any track record. Mm-hmm. I've heard it all.
Tell us the story, though. What's one that kind of sticks with you as you go about your journey?
There's one that I remember, and I don't want to say give any names, but there was somebody also in diagnostics. There were two actually who basically said the same thing. And I was just sort of like doing my research and telling them, I was like, look, I have this idea, can we talk about it? And they were working on both of them were working on, it was two different meetings, but they were both working on some diagnostic product, which I didn't think we were at all competitive with. And they basically told me, listen, you're wasting your time. We're going to get to market before you. And all of the work or money you're investing is going to be wasted. So move aside and let us pave the way for what we're doing. Twice. I got that twice. Once over a Zoom and once over lunch. And both times I said to myself, F them. We'll see who's
stays standing at the end. I didn't know that it was going to be me at the end. And I still don't know that it's going to be, Anywhere DX, but I certainly weren't going to let them sort of like beat me down. So I've heard it all. If I let those kind of things or pushbacks sort of like affect me, then what would I be doing today? I'm way too passionate. And I knew that what they were doing was not answering the idea or the meat that we had in mind. Like I knew that we were not competitors. So I knew the problem wasn't me, it was them. And, you can't change them. So it is what it is. Like you're going to get pushback as an entrepreneur all the time. What we're experiencing now that we have Anywhere DX, you're right. We don't have pushback as much as we are truly trying to mount a very steep mountain. Very steep mountain. And so what you would call pushback, we just call sort of like, it's a consequence of an environment that is stacked against us. And not because we don't have the right product and not because it's not the right time, because we are in an environment that is risk averse and, still licking their wounds from too many failures in the industry, both of which were these companies, by the way. Both of which were the ones who pushed back pushed me back. And so that's what we're dealing with now. So now it's no longer pushback. Now we're just trying to kind of like climb this very steep hill. And, it's just one step at a time and then you repeat. And that's what we're doing.
So I want to dig into that for a second without revealing, who these two companies were. Can you share kind of your insight as to why you think they missed the mark? What specifically? You're very solution focused. You're trying to solve a problem. Some of the the requirements that you've set in place drive that, but you're not married to a technology. You're not married to much beyond the ease of use and the accessibility and the form factor. So what do you think they got wrong?
When I kind of came up with this idea and and I hadn't started developing the company yet, a lot of people came to me and said, Nathalya, have you seen Q Health? Q Health has millions of dollars funded and they're 10 years ahead of you. So I'm like, let me find out. Again, I was green. Like I didn't know anything. So I look up Q Health and they have this beautiful little machine that sits on your counter. And then you have these disposables. And then when you kind of go deep, you realize they sat on this technology for, about 10 years until they found the pink elephant called COVID-19, where, people were going to buy these. They were so desperate for testing that they had the number one solution for molecular testing. Like, it was like the best innovation. And everybody, and by the way, when I say everybody, large companies bought these sort of like devices for all their employees because they wanted all their employees to stay healthy, and they would give them this instrument, and they would give them dozens of disposables to use in the instrument so that they knew that their employees would stay healthy and they would come to work and they were negative and they would test every single day, and they made millions, right, Michael? They did so well. I think they went public and they were valued at $4 billion. But they sat on this technology for 10 years. But I remember when I first spoke to Michael and I had first met him and I said, Q Health, they're not going to make it. And he said, you're probably right. And I said, because I would never buy it. These instruments were like $300 and every disposable was, $80 or something. Oh, wow. And I'm like, I would never buy this. Never. And he says nobody would. And the only reason they did so well is because all these big companies, we're talking about the Googles and the Metas and the Microsofts of the world, bought them for their employees, and they were thousands and thousands of employees. So they did very well during the pandemic. So what went wrong with them? Well, the market would never want to own a device and a disposable. So I call this a razor blade model, right? It works for the razor, but it doesn't really work for something that you use once a year, twice a year, right? Yeah. There's no reason to do that. And so what I think happened But what we know happened, we know now, is that a lot of companies sort of like piggybacked on that model, the Q Health model, which is the razor blade model, and created other ones similar. And their, value proposition was, we're cheaper. So it's the Q Health model, but we're cheaper. So they went from $50 for a instrument to $25 for an instrument. Those are great prices, but you know what? Consumers didn't want it. And I would bet that even if I were to give consumers the instrument, they still wouldn't want it because nobody wants to keep it. And I talk as a consumer because I don't know for those who have kids, and who are listening here, is when you're looking for a thermometer and you need it, what are the chances it's not broken or lost? Who wants to maintain an instrument? No one. And so when Michael and I really came to sort of like identify the true final, vision of this, we're like, it needs to feel and cost like a pregnancy test. And people were familiar, like they were very happy with the COVID tests that were available to them at the pharmacy. They just want to take something that they can test and throw away. And so all these companies who tried very hard to bring solutions to market followed this razor blade model, and it didn't work. No matter what price point, it just didn't work. It did not answer to the needs of the consumer. Whereas what we are doing is we are looking at the consumer and said, what would the consumer buy? And like you said, we're not looking at the technology. We don't care about the technology. We just need to answer to the needs of the consumer. And if the technology turns out that it's purple and green, and that's what the consumers will buy, that's what we will create.
There's an interesting psychology behind a lot of this that I'm sure that people have formally evaluated this in other sectors. But there's sort of a weight on your shoulders or a baggage that comes along with if you either buy or even just get in receipt for free of a box that looks shiny and nice. You have now this burden. You don't want to throw it away because it must have some inherent value, but you also don't want to be wedded to buying the things that just go with it, especially for something like strep throat or some infectious disease diagnostic. People want to retain choice and opportunity, unless it's something like if you're in the Apple ecosystem, that's a real investment you've now made, and Apple has done a great job to keep people in that ecosystem. But in these kinds of disposable infectious disease diagnostics, people don't want to be wedded to an ecosystem. They just want whatever's going to be next, whatever's cheapest and best and it's going to be useful, and they don't want to overthink it. And the burden that actually is like weirdly placed, even if you get in receipt of one of these boxes, like a Q Health box for free, it actually places a psychological burden on an individual to kind of keep it and hold it in safe and then ideally like they have to feel like they have to go out of their way to spend more potentially to get the next cartridge that will go with it versus the thing. It's a sunk cost that nobody really wants to have that burden of. And so we've just really, and there's from a technology and build perspective, I totally get why Q Health and others would build it. They're coming at it from the position of, well, a doctor's office definitely wants that kind of thing for a lot of things. If they can spend an upfront amount here, but then have thousands of tests that they run in the future be 50% less because it's just the cartridge, great. They'll oftentimes go with that. Or the technology is something that as a interesting technological innovator, you might say, this is really cool. We can link this to the internet. We can link it to people's EHRs. We can do all kinds of fancy stuff. Turns out the average mom, the average dad, the average person really not only wouldn't pay for it, but actually is actively almost disincentivized to be part of that ecosystem in a lot of ways. And so we've just really embraced that. And there are so many benefits in terms of where we're going with our technology. As soon as we really took this position of saying, we're not going to build fancy, and for lack of a better word at the moment, we're not going to build durable. We want this to be a one-use thing. All of a sudden, it opens up a world of opportunity to get your cost of manufacturing down way lower than others. Because now you don't really have to worry about, is this going to last for 18 cycles or for 1,000 uses or something. You just have to say, is this going to last and be highly reliable for one? And once you take that approach, the materials you can use get different. The approach you can take gets easier. So it's really, really nice advantages as a company and as building a marketable product that people can actually afford and buy in the future. That comes with this just sort of clarifying mindset of we want to keep it simple and accessible. And Silicon Valley might not always love a lack of sexy, but you know what? We talk to a lot of investors, and in general, we've gotten great feedback. People are tired of the fancy diagnostic efforts for home. A lot of them got burned on it, and they're saying, look, we love what you're doing. Like, that makes so much sense. Don't build a tech first program, build a use case first program, and then find the tech. And even how we're connecting into telemedicine and treatment, low tech, like it's going to be something that is based around a QR code and really, really simple and easy and essentially free for the consumer.
I have to say, like, this is what Michael was able to bring, to my understanding, to bring this, because when I came up with this idea, it was just a strep test and then go see a doctor, right? And it's Michael's sort of like experience in having worked with all these different companies who was able to really give me the clarity of the importance of making something simple, single use. Not that that's not what I wanted, but it kind of validated that is really the only way to go. And then when you add this telehealth component to it, I remember when I first came up with this idea, I was talking to friends and they were like, oh, and then can it connect to your doctor? And I'm like, no, I don't know how to do that. And then Michael was like, wait a second, no, it has to. And this is how we're going to do it. And so now I know it's part of the full, it's a full circle solution. And that's what makes it so exciting, because when you talk about streamlining people's experience, it really is from soup to nuts, like end to end, streamlined. Why take a kid out of the house, out of their bed, to go see a doctor for any reason when you can do it all from home?
I see this a lot, and it's a little bit of a red flag sometimes, where you see a company that their story is, we're going to take this big technology out of the hospital, we're going to take it out of the doctor's office, and we're going to bring it into the home. And we've had a handful of clients that have done that successfully. But in a lot of cases, the patient doesn't want that hospital experience in their home. They want to solve whatever their particular problem is. They want to identify, what the issue is, or they want whatever level of care they can get, but they don't want to bring that experience in their home. So when they're starting with the idea of big tech and make it small and bring it home, that doesn't always solve the patient problem. You had mentioned something in the middle of all of that some things, in making this happen, you focus on making it easy, but we all know when we're trying to make an easy experience, a lot of complicated thinking and building has to go into that to make it happen, because that's just how it works everywhere. So, without getting into too much of the IP, what are some of the things that have been, challenging along the way that maybe were surprising?
So, again, I'm going to say about what I thought my vision was, and then Michael could tell you about all the hard things into that vision. First, using saliva was very important. And then it was running a molecular test, which is a highly sensitive. It really is taking a big machine and putting it into this small little thing. And I was like, no big deal. We're just going to do it. And then having a very simple readout. And when I compared to all the other companies, nobody had a simple readout. So I was like, I don't know. I just want a simple readout. And then when you think about all these steps, Michael could tell you how challenging they are.
I think that for us, making something very, very simple, you're absolutely right. It is hard. It's easy to make something complex, because if you can just keep bolting things together, you can get it to where it needs to be, and that's fine. I think there's a couple things. One, my view is it takes really deep expertise to figure out how to make something that should be complex simple. I'm not to harp on Apple again, but obviously Apple has made one of the most complex technologies into something that a first grader could use, in the iPhone or a preschooler, for that matter. And that took deep expertise. I think that's something that we have at Anywhere. We have real experience. And one of those areas is certainly on like the actual readout, how we do it, how we allow somebody to be able to read out a molecular diagnostic tool just on their own with their own two eyes. That usually requires like an instrument and a camera that reads photons and all this stuff. And we don't actually need that. We just need the eyeballs. And so that takes a little bit of knowledge around molecular engineering and molecular biology that maybe isn't always the first place that somebody building this test would look. But also one of the really simple things that's completely overlooked is how you prepare the sample up front. It's actually really hard to take a saliva sample, get it out of the person, and then be able to run what's called a LAMP test, which is like a PCR. It's a molecular amplification test on saliva. That's actually a really hard thing to do. And to be able to do it so that somebody who's never seen a diagnostic tool in their life can run it on their baby at home or on their kid at home, whatever the case might be, is even more challenging. And so that's where having a clear head about what you want the end product to be is probably the most important starting point. We know that we don't want it to get clunky. We don't want it to get complicated. And when we stick to those rules, it forces us to find the right people, to find the right approaches. And when we also say we want to stick to inexpensive for manufacturing costs, it also pushes us in a certain mindset to start thinking about, okay, how do we actually do this? And frankly, it's taken some real research and development effort to find the right approaches. And that's kind of where our real special sauce is for this device. And it's the least interesting part of the device for a lot of people because very few people think about the sample prep up front. But to be able to make this into something that truly can be under $5 to build and have it be highly sensitive and highly specific and highly user-friendly is taking a lot of R&D. And that's something that I think we're really proud of building. And it's a unique aspect. It's where the IP lives. And what's also very interesting, not the question asked, but this component of it doesn't have to be locked into just our device. If we want, we can go sell this IP to other manufacturers that can really boost their sensitivity for their own assays or their own tests. So we're also looking at it from more a business perspective. What IP can we build that's hard to build, that makes something easy to use, that might actually give us a diversified revenue stream in the future?
Kind of dovetails really nicely into where is the business at today? What milestones have you reached, and what's the future look like?
I'll let Nathalya comment in a moment. I think we've been in a real research development and now we have a de-risking phase. That is some of the technology, some of the really core technology of this. Actually, we're saying we don't even want to touch that. Like we want to buy it off the shelf, because to improve upon what's off the shelf would cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Like we don't want to do that. And that's actually the mistake that some companies have made in this space, like thinking that these small incremental gains would somehow give them a better market share. Like, no, that is not worth the investment. So the nice thing is we're starting with an already de-risked kind of core module, which is the LAMP technology. And now we're in a phase where we've de-risked all the other parts, the end product and the sample prep product. And we're building these into a prototype. This will be the second prototype that we've brought forward. We learned a lot with the first prototype. We actually made some changes. And so this will be the second one that we feel very good about. It's almost certainly not going to be the prototype that the consumer ends up getting. That's just how diagnostics go. We'll probably learn here. But this will be probably the most important step for us in terms of getting a product that we can actually start trialing in real users' hands rather than sort of the benchtop testing that has really dominated our efforts thus far. So we're excited to be moving into this phase. We've gotten non-dilutive funding from the NSF and the NIH. We have good relationships with those entities. We actually just had the NIH come back to us and effectively say, can we give you more money? And so we're very excited about the interest from, third parties, third-party funders in the government that see the value here. And we're taking those funds and we're taking the WeFunder campaign, and we're going to be starting a new campaign and fundraise to really get these products built in a way that we can start really doing some robust clinical trials and testing as we gear up to bring this into FDA trials. Nathalya?
So, where I stand, I think, and where the business is, so on the R&D and the development, Michael gave you a great description of what's going on. On the business side, where I'm seeing the things that are most exciting to us is the fact that now people are listening. And the conversations are a lot more meaningful, and we can see that they will actually convert into significant impact for us. So getting, the NSF and the NIH to listen, not only to listen, but to say, okay, now, what's next with us? Like, let's not end this here. Or, conversations with investors who are saying, okay, look, this is great. Let's be in touch in a couple months. These are all very validating to us and very exciting to us because we can actually see this moving in the right direction. For a long time, it was just completely flat, and we just couldn't get these conversations to go anywhere. The WeFunder campaign helped us a great deal because instead of going to institutional investors, our philosophy or our strategy was, let's prove product market fit before we even have a product. And so going out there into the world and saying, how much would you love this? And if you would, why don't you be part of it and get a piece of it? And it's actually happening, and people are responding. And by responding, then we can go back to these institutional investors and say, look, if you're afraid of the market, we already have it proven. This is happening. People want this more than ever. So there's a lot more movement. There's a lot more, the water's getting hot, and it's very exciting to see. And I think that everything that happened in the past 5 or 6 years that created such scar tissue with investors when it came to diagnostics, I think it's starting to kind of calm down, and we're starting to see a little bit more interest in this space. So we're very excited about what's going on. There's never any guarantee on where a company is going to go, if it's going to succeed or not, but we're definitely putting all the pieces of the puzzles down so that we can actually see this through.
You mentioned WeFunder. Can you just give us kind of a quick overview of what that campaign is and how it's working for you?
It's a crowdfunding campaign. It's allowing the everyday person to invest as little as $150 into a company as an investor. So every dollar they invest, it will be a little piece of the company when that company actually moves into a larger round. It's similar to like a GoFundMe, but it's not donation, it's investment. So you're not donating into a company, but you're actually investing into a company, which is great because any amount of money will actually turn into a piece of it later on. And so what we are seeing is a lot more people who have never been investors, who have never even thought about being investors. It actually opens the door to them of what does investing look like? So it not only allows us to get capital, but it also opens the door to people that would have never thought of investing to actually make their first investment. So it's a perfect marriage of educating the population, right? The regular lay person to invest and us to sensitize the ecosystem as to what we're doing and getting them to be involved with us. So we just find this to be such a great marriage for us, and it's actually creating more impact than we thought, and it's going well. We were looking to raise very small round of $300,000. We're at almost $240,000 in, and it's every single day we get these small checks. Sometimes we get big checks, sometimes we get small checks. But what's very exciting is the comments that we see. Like one woman that I've never met before, I don't know how she heard about us. She put in a very small amount, and she basically said, I'm a teacher, and I could have sold 100 of these last year alone. So that is so validating to us and so exciting to us, because schools have always been a market that we wanted to tap into. We want these to be in the nurse's office of every single school system in the country, if not in the world. And so having a teacher say that and validating what we always envisioned is really great for us. And it's something that we can bring back to us when we go in for institutional funding.
Michael, have you been through this kind of experience before? And what are 3 things that you would say to your peers if they were considering starting their own startup in any space, not necessarily this specific space, but looking at kind of the business side of things? What are some recommendations that you could make to them?
I've certainly been in a lot of fast-moving biotech startups, some very successful, and others that have kind of muddied along, some that have switched gears. So a little bit of everything, I suppose, particularly in the devices space, in the software and sort of digital health space as well. And I think one of the most important things, especially for anyone who is thinking about building a device, like a physical thing that somebody is going to hold in their hand, is to have a very good idea before you start doing anything, both of what that's going to look like to actually build it. How long is it really going to take? It's kind of like the diagnostics ecosystem is somewhat famous for people starting a project and saying, oh, we'll be done with this in a year, and telling investors that there's very little to do. The reality is most people have no idea what they're about to get into, because they've never done it before, and that's very common in diagnostics, actually, because a lot of like PhD students and postdocs, like everyone's kind of like spent their graduate school like measuring stuff. So they say, oh, I can just go create a company that measures stuff. Not if you're trying to get into the regulated space. So I think having a very, very clear idea early on of exactly what it is you want to do, talking to the right people who actually have done it, who have gone through the FDA, who have really understood what it takes to build a regulated device, is just absolutely essential, not just for the development process, but also to ensure that you're telling your investors the right thing and the truth about what it's going to take. Because the investor community is much more savvy than most of the startups assume. They actually know their shit, and when they don't, they know to go and ask. And that's because they're about to put $1 or $2 million into you, or $10 million or more, or a few $100,000. Either way, whatever their base is, they're putting something substantial to them relative to their own abilities, and so they're going to do their diligence. The other thing is, like, it takes tenacity, and Nathalya embodies tenacity. And it's why I wanted to co-found a company specifically with her. I'm very much while I'm very tenacious about biology, about science, about changing the face of public health, Nathalya brings this tenacity in the business sector, in the fundraising sector, and you have to have both. So if you don't have the right co-founder, I feel very firmly that these kinds of companies can't be built with one person. You need the right complements, and I think that it's extraordinarily important. And if you come up with an idea, you have to be ready to give up equity to find that right co-founder, and recognize that giving up equity is going to make a more successful company in the long run, is ultimately going to be more successful overall for everyone's reasons for doing it. And those are some of the biggest things that I look at and think about.
I talk to so many people who try to do all of it. They try to go it all alone. Can you imagine for a moment what it would have been like for you if you had been bitten by this bug and you said, well, I can do all of this and also my full-time gig? Yeah. What would that can you even imagine that?
I mean, I wouldn't have gotten the email account started, right? I think it would. Different people bring different skill sets. Mine is not one to do the administrative pushing and things like that. I can't really imagine it because I wouldn't have done it. That's the. I guess in that sense I can imagine it. I've thought about starting a company like this for a long time, and I just hadn't yet I hadn't found the right person who I wanted to do it with, who I trusted, who I felt would be the right complement. I can go and partner up with any number of scientists or professors or whatever in the world, but they wouldn't bring that same interesting angles that Nathalya brings. And had I tried to go it alone, 100% it would have failed a year ago. You know?
Oh, I don't know about that.
And Nathalya, how about you? What are 3 things that you would share, or, tips for somebody who maybe has less of the, the bio or the technical aspect of this and more of the vision and the drive? What would you recommend to them when starting something like this?
It's interesting you asked me that, because I've been asked that question before by people who said, I don't know that I want to keep staying my job. I want to start something. And I'm like, okay, what do you want to start? And they're like, well, I don't know. I'm just kind of like thinking about different ideas. So I always give them this advice. My advice is go work. Go work. Go in your lives. And if you're a dentist, go work as a dentist. If you're an accountant, go work as an accountant. And then go find the things that hurts the most. Go find those gaps. The pain you have to feel the pain in your gut. And that's what it was for me. Like, I felt this pain in my gut. And it wasn't just pain for me. I remember like when I was feeling this need of fixing this problem, which was completely insane. Like, I was an event planner before. Like, it was completely insane that I would go into this industry, like, out of completely being green. I had no idea what I was doing, but I felt the pain in my gut. And then I remember going to like a Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts or the supermarket and thinking, all of these mothers, like, if they don't come to work, they're not getting paid. And I remember when I used to take all day, it would take me a whole day to take my daughter or my son to the doctors for a strep test. And, you have to kind of feel that pain and that strong desire to fix it. Because then if that passion is not there, it's not going to go anywhere. So I tell people all the time, I'm like, go work. Go do what you know how to do, and then find the things that bother you the most, and then find out if that is a problem that is reasonable to solve. And then if you have that passion to solve it, then solve it. Go and solve it. And so that is my biggest piece of advice. Is I became, like, people ask me, how does it feel to be an entrepreneur? I said, I don't know what it means to be an entrepreneur. The only thing I understand is that I'm not going to stop. Nothing is going to stop me. I know there's a chance we'll fail. In fact, Michael told me when we first met, he says, this can fail. I'm like, I know it can fail, but we still have to try it, right? So, you have to be ready to fail, and you have to have the passion. And without these two, then, it would be very hard for you to really get it off the ground in a meaningful way. You can get things off the ground, but it's never going to be like something that is for the long run. And then you have to think about dedicating a whole bunch of yourself, right? There's extreme sacrifice associated to that, and you have to be ready for it. I know I've sacrificed a lot. I'm still a mom of 4. Yes, they're older, and, potentially like being a grandmother very soon. And I have to think about that, and I have an enormous amount of support on my end. Like, my whole family supports me, and I have a great co-founder. And I think that Michael made a great point. You can't do this alone. I tried, and eventually it ended with finding the perfect co-founder for us. And so these are the kind of things that you have to just really feel it, and you have to just be ready to fight for it. Because if you don't have that, it's just not going to go anywhere.
Thank you both. You were great today. And, I look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you so much. And thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. This is a lot of fun.
If you made it here, thank you. If you haven't already, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you want to learn more about this topic, I expand on it below, as well as in my LinkedIn newsletter. That's all for now. More soon.